This is the Isla Tortuga, home to one of North America's most iconic island reptiles, the Tortuga Island rattlesnake, the Crotalus tortugensis. That's what it is, right? The Tortuga Island rattlesnake, the Crotalus tortugensis. This island pit viper is endemic to the Tortuga Island in the Baja California, but in the southern portion that belongs to Mexico. Weighing in as a medium-sized rattlesnake, it has involved distinctive traits because of its isolated environment. And in this video, we're going to explore the Crotalus tortugensis in depth, including its taxonomy and how it relates to other rattlesnakes, its unique anatomy and behavior, what it eats and what it produces, and finally its venom and conservation status. And throughout the video, we're going to be comparing it to one of its cousin rattlesnakes, the western diamondback, the Crotalus atrox, and the red diamond rattlesnake, the Crotalus ruber, to understand just why the Tortuga rattlesnake is truly special. The Tortuga Island rattlesnake belongs to the genus Crotalus in the family of Viperidae. It was first described as the Crotalus tortugensis by Van Denberg and Slevin in 1921, but for many decades it was treated as a subspecies of the western diamondback, the Crotalus atrox tortugensis. Recent genetic studies, however, confirmed that the Crotalus tortugensis is a distinct species by Zahir et al. In 2019, found enough genetic divergence between the Crotalus atrox and the Crotalus tortugensis to recognize them as a separate species. In other words, even though this rattlesnake looks like a small island version of the western diamondback, the Tortuga rattler has been on its own evolutionary journey long enough to be considered its own unique species. On the evolutionary tree, the Crotalus tortugensis is most closely allied with the North American Crotalus, especially Crotalus atrox and the nearby Baja rattlesnake, Crotalus ruber. Like the Crotalus ruber, it inhabits Baja California islands, though the Crotalus ruber is typically found on the mainland and on the Cedros Island and not the Tortuga Island. The Amphibian and Reptile Atlas of Peninsular California notes that the most similar species to the Crotalus tortugensis are indeed the western diamondbacked Crotalus atrox and the red diamond rattlesnake, the Crotalus ruber. All three share the broad, diamond-shaped dorsal blotches that give them their common names. However, the Crotalus tortugensis shows subtle scalation differences and reduced diamond pattern that sets it apart. It's worth noting that many rattlesnake island endemics show dramatic adaptations. For example, the Santa Catalina rattlesnake, the Crotalus catalinensis, lost its rattle entirely. The Crotalus tortugensis has not gone that far, but its head is proportionally smaller and its patterns less bold than its mainland cousins. These features reflect the classic island syndrome of insular dwarfism and changed behavior in isolated snakes. In fact, this species is often called the Tortuga diamond rattlesnake or Tortuga diamondback, emphasizing its place within the diamondback rattlesnakes group. As the name suggests, the Tortuga Island rattlesnake is found only on the island Tortuga, a small volcanic island off the coast of Baja California Sur. Is not found on any other island or mainland locality. The Tortuga Island is arid and rocky, dotted with cactus, agave, and sparse scrub. The rattlesnake thrives in the barren, rocky desert terrain there. It occupies most of the island's slopes and foothills, avoiding only the steep volcanic crater at the center, which is dry and mouse-free, of course. The island's only native mammal is the Dickey's mouse, the Paramyscus dickii, and this mouse plays a key role in the snake's primary prey. Because the snake's range is so restricted, its population is naturally bounded to the island size. However, the Crotalus tortugensis is actually reported to be abundant on the Tortuga Island, found at high densities and suitable habitat. Interestingly, local people generally avoid the island due to its reputation as snake infested, which has inadvertently protected the habitat from development. This remote location also means that there is little direct human interference. The Mexican government recognizes Crotalus tortuguensis under NOM 059 special protection, reflecting its limited range, but its stronghold on an uninhabited island has kept the population relatively stable so far. The Tortuga Island rattlesnake is medium-sized for a rattlesnake, but small compared to its mainland relatives. Large adult males reach only about 1 meter in total length. That's roughly 3 feet 3 inches. By contrast, a western diamondback, the Crotalus atrox, can grow well over 5 feet, like 1.5 meters long. One published record notes that the largest Crotalus tortuguensis at 105.8 centimeters, 41.6 inches. Females tend to be somewhat smaller. This smaller body size is characteristic of insular dwarfing, where predators often shrink on resource-poor islands. Beyond size, the Crotalus tortuguensis has a head that is proportionally shorter and narrower than the Crotalus atrox. Anatomical studies note that its skull and bone proportions are different. For example, a relatively shorter squamosal bone. In terms of scales, nearly all individuals lack the second, upper, loreal scale between the nostril and eye, a trait usually present in the Crotalus atrox. And most have additional intergenal chin scales along the jaw. These scalation details help herpetologists distinguish the Crotalus tortuguensis from similar species. The snake's coloration and pattern are also distinctive. The ground color is gray to gray-brown and sometimes with faint purple or pink tinge. Overlaying this are 32 to 41 dark brown to purplish brown dorsal blotches, each roughly hexagonal or diamond-shaped, unlike the Crotalus atrox, whose diamonds are usually bold and well-defined. The Tortuga rattlesnake's blotches are less pronounced and have irregular black edges. These muted colors and reduced pattern may help the snake blend into the island's rocky terrain. Overall, a quick field identification feature is that the Crotalus tortuguensis looks like a miniaturized, duller version of the western diamondback, which is noticeably smaller head and slightly different scale counts. Little detailed study has been done on the behavior of the Crotalus tortuguensis, but we can infer a few traits. As a rattlesnake, it is venomous and is using its rattling tail as a warning when disturbed. Historical notes from Van Denberg's early accounts said that these rattlers would rattle vigorously if approached. However, modern observers describe them as relatively calm and less excitable than the Crotalus atrox. In other words, they are not known to be usually aggressive beyond any rattlesnake's usual defensiveness. They likely spend their hot summer days sheltering in shade or rock crevices, becoming active at dawn and dusk, meaning of crepuscular activity, and hunting at night during the warm season, much like a lot of other desert rattlesnakes. On the Tortuga Island, the Crotalus tortuguensis shares a habitat with few competitors or predators. Notably, the California king snake, the Lampropeltis californiae, also lives on the island, and king snakes are known to eat rattlesnakes in other systems. It has been suggested that juvenile Tortuga rattlers may fall prey to these king snakes. Other than that, the rattlers likely sit at the top of the food chain on the island, with no avian or mammalian predators reported. Interestingly, herpetologists note that rodents and lizards on the island may have become accustomed to the presence of rattlesnakes, affecting their own behavior and evolution. A subject still ripe for study. The diet of the Tortuga Island rattlesnake is relatively simple due to the island's limited fauna. The only native terrestrial mammal on the Tortuga Island is the Dickey's white-footed mouse, the Periomyscus dickeyii, and this mouse constitutes the core of the rattlesnake's diet. Stomach contents of museum specimens have revealed bits of rodent hair, and the snakes are often found in the habitat where these mice live. Aside from mice, it is likely that juvenile rattlesnakes also eat small lizards. For example, the granite spiny lizard, the Scoloporus ocuti, is common on the island as well, and possibly insects when they're young. Essentially, the Crotalus tortuguensis is a carnivore that relies on the island's native prey base. Because the mouse is absent from the volcanic crater, you mostly find rattlesnakes in areas that mice occur, rocky slopes and bajadas, rather than the crater's flat bottom. Like other pit vipers, the Tortuga rattlesnake hunts by ambush or slow stalking, using heat-sensing pits organs to strike unsuspecting prey, and after they bite, it will track the envenomated rodent. Although on the small island terrain, the prey usually doesn't go far. The small mammal diet is typical of mid-sized rattlesnakes. Unlike the giant relative to Crotalus atrox, the Crotalus tortugensis does not have the body size to tackle large prey such as rabbits or lizards the size of adult iguanas. Not much specific data exists on the reproduction in the Crotalus tortugensis, but it follows the general rattlesnake pattern. Like all pit vipers in the Crotalus gene is ovoviviparous, meaning that females give birth to live young rather than laying eggs, and mating likely occurs in the spring after emerging from brumation. And females then gestate for several months. In mainland diamondbacks, gestation is roughly 4 to 6 months long, when birthing occurring in late summer. We can assume the Crotalus tortugensis has a similar schedule, though the dry island climate might affect shift timing slightly. Litter size is unknown for the species, but western diamondbacks typically produce around 6 to 12 neonates. Given the smaller body size of the Crotalus tortugensis, a typical litter might be on the lower end of that range. One interesting note from the rattlesnake biology, some Crotalus atrox and Crotalus horridus can store sperm for years, allowing delayed fertilization if conditions aren't ideal. There is no direct report of this in the Crotalus tortugensis, but it wouldn't be surprising if island snakes share this trait. Juvenile snakes measure under a foot long at birth, and young rattlesnakes on the island will be vulnerable to king snake predation, as mentioned, as well as extreme weather and possible cannibalism. The Tortuga Island rattlesnake is fully venomous, possessing the characteristic hemotoxic venom of diamondback rattlesnakes. Actual studies on its venom composition are lacking, but it's presumed to be similar to that of relatives, containing enzymes that break down tissue, disrupt blood clotting, and cause pain and swelling. What is known that its venom yield is relatively low. L.M. Klauber reported an average venom yield of only around 56 milligrams from the Crotalus tortugensis. By comparison, a large Crotalus atrox can yield around 277 milligrams in Klauber's measurements. So, the island snake's dose is only about a fifth of that. Despite the small quantity, a bite from the Crotalus tortugensis would still be dangerous to a human or large animal, given the potency of the diamondback's venom. Though fortunately, human encounters are extremely rare on uninhabited Tortuga Island. In summary, the Crotalus tortugensis has typical rattlesnake venom and fangs, but scaled down to a smaller size. The ecology of the Crotalus tortugensis is essentially a story of island survival. With no large predators and only one main prey species, the rattlesnake fits into the simple food web. Its high density on the island suggests it fills an apex predator niche in the terrestrial ecosystem. The lack of human disturbance has allowed its behavior and population to remain natural. If humans arrived in force, that would definitely change. Island reptiles often show fascinating traits due to limited resources and isolation. In the Crotalus tortugensis, we see insular dwarfism, smaller size, and changes in coloration and scalation. Behaviorally, island snakes sometimes become either more docile or more aggressive than mainland forms, depending on predator pressures. In this case, the Crotalus tortugensis seems relatively placid. Its reliance on a single prey species ties its fate to that of the Dickey's mouse. If anything happened to that mouse population, for instance, a introduced disease or competitor, the rattlesnake would suffer. Another ecological note, because the island hosts no large herbivores or domestic animals, the vegetation and prey base remain intact. This is fortunate, as introduced goats and rodents have devastated many other island ecosystems. So far, the Tortuga Island appears to be free of such invasive mammals. Unlike, say, the Cedros Island, which had grazing animals, the main invaders to watch would be things like rats or feral cats, but none have been reported. Climate change could pose a future threat by altering precipitation patterns or increasing extreme heat, potentially reducing prey availability, but for now, the Crotalus tortugensis survives in a relatively stable niche, albeit one that is tiny in global terms. According to the IUCN Red List in 2007 assessment, the Crotalus tortugensis is classified of least concern. This may be surprising for a species found only on a single island, but the reasoning is that the population is believed to be large and stable with no immediate declines observed. So there is currently no habitat destruction or major collecting pressure. However, conservationists note that its extremely limited range is vulnerability. A single catastrophic event such as a wildfire or hurricane damage or disease could impact the whole species. Thus, in many ways, the species is of concern precisely because of its confined to one tiny area. The Mexican government recognized this by listing the Tortuga Island rattlesnake under the NOM 059 special protection. This provides a legal framework discouraging capture or harm, though enforcement is modest on a remote island. In practice, the snake's greatest protector has been nature itself. Local folklore and fear of snakes keep people away, reducing human disturbance. The Rattlesnake Conservancy notes that the Tortuga Island's near pristine status owes in part to the reputation of the Crotalus tortugensis, as locals generally avoid the island due to the heavy presence of rattlesnakes. Looking forward, conservationists monitor the island for introduced species and ecosystem changes. For example, if non-native rats or goats were to accidentally introduced, they could compete with prey on the native mice and alter the habitat. Climate-driven shifts through droughts or flooding, and also concerns for an island ecosystem. If non-native rats or goats were accidentally introduced, they could compete with or prey on the native mice and alter the habitat. Climate-driven shifts, droughts or flooding, are also concerns for our island ecosystem. Currently, active conservation measures like captive breeding or translocation are not in place for this snake. It is surviving well in situ. However, ongoing surveys and maintaining legal protection are key. In recent years, scientists have suggested that monitoring population trends on the Tortuga Island should definitely continue, since new data, genetic or ecological, could change in its conservation outlook. So the Tortuga Island rattlesnake, the Crotalus tortugensis, is a remarkable example of island biogeography and speciation, endemic to a single small island. It has evolved to be smaller and differently colored than its mainland cousins, and it feeds primarily on one type of mouse, lives in a rugged desert environment, and apparently thrives with minimal human impact. Scientifically, it offers insights into how isolation and limited resources shape predators' morphology and behavior. From a practical standpoint, it reminds us that even species listed as least concern can be fragile simply by virtue of having nowhere else to go. For students of herpetology and wildlife conservation, the Crotalus tortugensis is a case study in balancing the abundant life on an island against extreme geographic restriction. Its story underlines the importance of protecting islands' native fauna and being vigilant against new threats. As research continues, for example, new genetic studies or venom analyses, we will learn more about how this island rattlesnake fits into the broader family tree of rattlesnakes and how best to ensure it We will learn about how this island rattlesnake fits into the broader family tree of rattlesnakes and how best to ensure it endures. In the meantime, the snakes of the Tortuga Island continue their quiet reign, a hidden treasure in the Gulf of California, worth preserving for generations to come.